My name is Heather Feather. I am the owner of Rare Bird Medicine, and today's topic is culturally acceptable racism. I'm blessed with many great people. I have a few beloved best friends, people that I would call best friends. And they're a scream. They're hilarious and the most fun and amazing humans. And I'm so grateful that we're friends. And one of these friends, my dear friend Brandy, is wicked funny and deeply spiritual. I was describing that there was a gentleman of interest of another culture that was that had my attention. I was like, well, you certainly have my attention. And I came to learn that this gentleman really doesn't have the opportunity to be with someone of another culture. Basically, our paths will never cross in a romantic way because his culture is indoctrinated, apparently, or his tribe is indoctrinated in culturally acceptable racism. And this is what my friend said to me. I was like, well, I really like this person. They really have my attention. I feel like we could have a great love. I feel like we have similar interests. I feel like everything I learn about this person, they're amazing. They're so neat. They love sci-fi and birds and all these different things that I also love. And the more I learn, the more I'm like, wow, what an unbelievable person. And I was like, I believe that this person in the past attempted to date outside of their culture, and it was a halt was put to it. So she said, well, that's just culturally acceptable racism. That's where we just go, oh no, it's okay to just stick to your own tribe. Now, racism as a general rule, I do think ultimately, it stems from ignorance. It stems from non-openness. It stems from a closedness. And oddly, it can often come from people that are wanting to be understood in the world, and yet they're closing themselves off from the world, or from merging with the world, or from including the world and understanding their culture. Because there's no greater way. I love to see mixed races come together and create families, because I feel like it's one of the ways that we heal the travesty, the tragedy, the trauma of separation and separatistness. I do think that racism and separatistness and separation from other races, everything comes down to perspective. I think that foundationally, it has a lot to do with us being tribal. If you think of the natives that inhabit these lands called the Americas, they were of many different tribes, and they would often war with each other because they were tribal. I like to call them the true Americans. It's interesting to me in the modern age that we speak of Mexicans being immigrants, and it's like, so South America and North America are connected. They're called the Americas. We refer to North America as America, which is a little racist if you ask me. It's called the States, and there are two Americas. There's a Southern and a Northern. And the peoples of Mexico and those areas, if they were nomadic, then they're the true Americans, not foreigners, not people with my skin color that clearly came from, I'm Scotch, Irish, German, French, Italian, clearly came from another land. No, I'm the foreigner. I'm the immigrant. Those people were here first, but I digress. We have this normative where it just... we're talking about evolving on the topic of racism, but it's perfectly acceptable if your culture doesn't want to merge with people of other cultures, then, that makes sense. Stick to your own kind. As if we are our bodies, as if we are our flesh costumes, what's even odder about it is that many of these peoples will come from spiritual backgrounds. These people that separate and segregate themselves from merging or engaging or having union or sharing love with a different culture, they'll have a spiritual background. And with a spiritual background and with spirit to focus on, if you're not the body, if you are spirit, then you're not the body. If you're eternal spirit, if there's an eternality to your soul, If you have a soul and it's going to go somewhere when you're rotting on the bone or turning to ash, then you're not that culture. I think it's weird that two-leggeds want to hold culture all the time. They're like, cultural appropriation. And it's like, the only way cultural appropriation could be a thing is if we truly do only live one life, and if humans were the ones in possession of culture, which from my perspective, they're not. Spirit owns culture because spirit owns life. It's a little bit of an ego possessiveness to think that humans own culture in the first place. And in the second place, it's rude to imply that you own your culture while you're inhabiting that body. I, again, don't think that you only live once. I've talked about reincarnation, past lives. If you have that concept in your matrix, do you think the only thing I've ever been in all of my incarnations is a white lady? That's it. That's the only role I ever play. And this is another way where we just have culturally appropriate racism. It's super culturally appropriate to hate white women and white males. It's so appropriate. It doesn't matter what race you are. You are more than welcome in the modern age to call, white women high maintenance, to call them Karens, to talk about how they have to count their steps and they're so, they're just the worst. They're just the worst to deal with. They don't know how to dance. They can't, white people can't jump. You're welcome to hate on white men all you want. You don't have to be a white male to hate on a white male. Now, other cultures, you're not allowed to make fun of another culture, but as a general rule, any culture in the world is welcome in the modern age to just hate on white people. Well, here's some of white history. If you are Irish, if you came from Ireland and immigrated here to the States, you couldn't get a job. My sister has a dear friend that has no Irish allowed, or Irish and back, or Irish need not apply. These were common signs. There was a lot of racism against Italians. They were seen as mobsters and, violent people and no Italians. We don't want any of this. And there were a lot of names and slurs that went along with that. So I'm talking about this because I think it's ridiculous and goofy that, first of all, we're so indoctrinated into believing that we are our bodies, and so indoctrinated into believing that we are our culture, and so indoctrinated into segregating ourselves, not just by our culture, by our genitals too. I mean, you find in offices, women often conglomerate together, men conglomerate together. It's like, can we not all hang out and have lunch together? What is this? This is like a weird behavior. People of the same races tend to conglomerate together. That's not as true today as it was 50 years ago or even 100 years ago. Of course, the further we go back in history, in my experience, the more ignorant and separatist it gets. So I'm grateful that we are having a greater melting pot, a greater merging, a greater coming together of the allness, which is unified subatomically. But I think it's important that we not act like people aren't trading racism for racism. If you're saying, I want my culture to be understood, I don't want people to be racist against me in an airport because I'm a Muslim man with a beard. I don't want people to be racist, against me. And I've heard of terrible tales of things that have happened to a beautiful restaurant here, Taste of India, where people were throwing bricks in their window, because there can be a lot of, Asian racism. There can be a lot of any people of color racism. So people will say I don't want to experience racism. I don't want to be vilified if I speak Ebonics because this is one of the languages I speak when I'm with my tribe, and I don't want to have to always code switch into white culture. Or if you're gay or if you're trans and you don't want to have to code switch to fit the paradigm so that you can just feel safe and like you're not going to have a hate crime committed against you. Fair. Yeah, it's really fair to want a safe space and to want your expression to be honored as a part of the whole. I think it's important that we all be clear that we're never going to get there if the path we take is to hate another race. If you don't want racism, then don't get there by being racist. Because if you be racist against another, if you go, it's just, the problem is all these white people. Well, that's not true. I mean, think for a second. Have you ever met a white male or a white female that was not high maintenance, that wasn't super privileged. They had a super difficult life. You know, Caucasians have death, murders, suicides, rapes, poverty, abject poverty. It's not skin tone that causes suffering. There are certain sufferings and dynamics that can be specific to skin tone. But if you then, in order to, I understand the frustration. I understand the need to express and voice your frustration. And I would never deny or want to squelch the right of somebody to be like, this is really frustrating. And from my perspective, there's no way to know whatever culture you are right now, what culture you were last time. Are you sure you were the culture that was oppressed last time? How do you know that white male or that white lady that you're judging wasn't one of the Egyptian slaves that helped build the pyramids? What do you know about the incarnation of a soul and who they truly were in the past? So it's a little tricky to assume that the way we're going to bring balance to ignorance is by just taking that ignorance and throwing it where we think it came from. The fact is, racism, ignorance, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia has always come from unevolved beings. And unevolved beings are present in every culture, in every gender identification, in every expression of life, and to such a degree that we have some normatives where it's just like, oh yeah, you definitely don't want to be racist against these people or those people. Oh, but feel free to make fun of white ladies. They're idiots, and it's like, okay, how do you know? Are you certain that soul's journey? Are you certain that you're not in a person of color flesh costume today because you were an oppressor, and that's karmically how you're going to come into balance as a soul, is to witness what people of color go through? I'm not saying that would be true of every soul, but I'm just saying with the concept of reincarnation and the idea that we live many lives, we get to be it all. So why are we saying that people of two different cultures shouldn't fall in love and come together? Is it inconvenient to your cultural practices? Only if those beloveds are going to be disrespectful to one another's beliefs. And how would love do that, Love reveres, it's reverent, it's peaceful, it's kind, it expands. All acts of love are maximal. It's maximal to love. So why would you want to stop the union of two beings that have the potential to expand love in this realm just because it feels culturally inconvenient? Therefore, no, you're only allowed to date the flesh costume that matches yours in this lifetime. That's so ignorant. And the same is true when comes to genitals, and it comes to sexual identity, and it comes to, I always say people will, just be like, it's not, you're supposed to be heterosexual. And it's like, okay, well, let's just do a little thought experiment together. I want you to picture a very butch, masculine presenting, masculine of center lesbian with a man. Does that look right to you? A very feminine, effeminate, more feminine of center expressing gay man being with a female, in the grocery store. Yes, queen, get the blueberries. They're on sale, honey. Does that seem more appropriate to you to force those energies that are more in the spectrum and don't go like A or B are the only options, like maybe A through Z are the options, or maybe 1 through a million are the options on the spectrum of topics like sexuality, like gender, like culture even. Everyone wants a person to be the culture that they are, but I don't identify that way. I grew up with a mother that believed very wholeheartedly in her last life she was an African male, and my father was the mother. And she died, and she left him to raise 3 kids because she received this from a psychic. And then she in this life had to raise 3 kids in her own in order to balance the karma. So I don't identify with a culture. I'm all that ever is, was, or will be. It's all connected. It always has been. Is there anything that you're thinking that could use some improvement to come back to the expansion of all is one? because it certainly is subatomically. You can always subscribe to Rare Bird Medicine, like, and comment on YouTube. Blessed be.